All right, hey everybody, we are live today and we're talking about how you can get more muscle growth when you focus on the negative in your set. And I'm going to explain what all that means and all that stuff. And we're going to get into all of that. So if you're on Facebook and you have any questions, just comment in the chat and I will get to those in a bit. So I found this really cool study. That compared well, first let's cover like the different parts of an exercise. So in any exercise you do, there's going to be a concentric and an eccentric portion of the movement, otherwise known as the positive and the negative. So for example, if you're doing bicep curls, I'll stand up real quick. So if you're doing bicep curls, this is the concentric, that's up, and then the eccentric is the down portion. So concentric, eccentric. So yeah, just a really cool study that compared the muscle size difference when people did only the concentric, so only the up, and when groups did only the negative, which is the down in this case, and when another group did both. So let's go ahead and pull up that study real quick. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay, so the first study, this was done in, actually not this one, it is, let's do this one first. So the first study was done last September 2022. So it's a pretty recent study. And in this study, they had 4 different groups of people. One group did the concentric and eccentric portion of the movement. So in that case, that's the up and down of the bicep curl. Another group did concentric only, which is only doing the up. And then a third group did eccentric only. So that's when you're going down in the bicep exercise. And then there was a fourth group that just literally did nothing. They just wanted to cross-reference, I'm assuming, to that group. So let's see. Okay, so yeah. And they did this for 5 weeks, twice a week for 5 weeks. And let's see, the total volume was higher in the concentric and eccentric because they were doing both the up and the down, the positive and the negative. The eccentric volume was a little bit higher than the concentric, but that's not surprising because you're actually stronger in the eccentric part of every exercise that you do. So you naturally can lift a little bit more weight. So that's not surprising overall. And then let's see. So yeah, so at the end of the study, they compared strength in different metrics and overall muscle thickness. So at the end of the study, let me just summarize for you guys real quick. Pull up my notes. Okay. So muscle. So when it comes to strength gains, there was a modest difference in terms of strength gains. The group that did the concentric and eccentric had the most strength gains out of all 3 groups who did the exercise, that is, with the eccentric only leading in second and the concentric only, so that's the up, leading last in place. So that's the strength gains. But there was more notable muscle gains across all 3 groups. So the concentric and eccentric, that's the up and down group, they saw the most muscle size and strength gains. Hold on, let me let someone in real quick. Okay. And then the eccentric only group saw the second most muscle size gains. And then the concentric only group they did see some muscle size gains, but they were last in terms of all 3. And it was so much so that there was over 4 times more muscle size in the concentric and eccentric group than the concentric group alone. So they were only doing I'm sorry, they were only doing the positive, so only doing the up. And there was almost 4 times more muscle size in the eccentric only group than the concentric only group. So big picture, what they concluded, let's go ahead and share my screen real quick. Again. So big picture, what they concluded is that, oh, can you guys see my screen? Okay, there it is. So they concluded that the eccentric training increased muscle strength and thickness similarly to the concentric eccentric training, though there were more strength and muscle gains in this group, but it was pretty similar across both groups. Despite half the training volume in the eccentric only group, suggesting that concentric contractions contributed little to the training effects. So what that means is there was better muscle and strength gains overall when they did both the up and the down, or the down only, versus the group who only went up. So that's a really cool study. There was another article on this that's summarized over like 15 different studies. This is by Schoenfeld. This was done back in, I think, 2017, where they cross-referenced over 15 notable studies on this subject, and they basically concluded pretty much the same thing. Their findings were a little bit more modest than this newer study, but even so, they found that negative training, when you focus on the negative, it does deliver better hypertrophy muscle growth than just focusing on the concentric. But yeah, that was an older study before this new one, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, so whenever you look at studies, you don't always just want to look at one study. You want to look at a bunch of different other ones. So just so that you guys can see both like the older and the newer stuff. So a lot of times whenever people do their training, you will see a lot of lifters focusing only on the concentric. Like they'll just let the eccentric go down. So let me give you guys an example. So I have a resistance band with me. So a lot of times when people are lifting, you know, they'll bring it up with the concentric and then they'll just let the negative drop the eccentric. So they'll go like this and just let the weight drop. So they're basically only working the concentric. And as those studies indicated, there's not as good of muscle and strength gains when you only focus on the concentric. So if you want to get, you know, as much size and strength potential out of your training, then this is how you should lift. So if you're doing bicep curl, you'll want to control the positive and then also resist the negative. So don't let it drop down, but actually resist it. So you're still working out the bicep, but you're not letting it drop down. And so when you do that, you're training both the positive and the negative. So to give you guys examples of a lot of exercises that people typically don't control the eccentric, but it's oftentimes with like back exercises like deadlift. A lot of times you'll see people do deadlift and, you know, obviously they're working when they're pulling it up, the concentric portion, but whenever they put it down, the eccentric, they just let it drop down. And there's not as much strength or muscle gains when you do that. Yes, it is less fatiguing overall to your body, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with if you're coming from a performance standpoint. So like, let's say that, you're powerlifting during a powerlifting competition, then yes, you can conserve energy and just focus on the concentric and just let the negative drop down. But I would say even if you're training for powerlifting, up until that competition, still train the negative so that you can get better muscle and strength gains, even if it's, you know, modest. I would say that that newer study indicated that the muscle thickness gains were pretty big difference whenever you focused on the negative as well. But I know some of those older studies in that the Schoenfeld article indicated that the gains were a little bit modest, but either way, they all indicate that there is a difference when you focus on the concentric and eccentric. So yeah, like for the example of like competitive lifting, like powerlifting, while you're training for the competition, go ahead and focus on both. And then of course, during the competition, and you'll see this a lot in strongman competitions, like a overhead press, like they'll push it up and then they'll just let it drop, which is fine for competing reasons. But in the process of building that strength and muscle size, go ahead and focus on the concentric and the eccentric. So in the situation of overhead press, that would be like controlling the positive and controlling the negative. Don't let it drop down. So a lot of some other exercises that you'll often see this in is like pendlay row. That's when you're like bent over, and I'll show you guys real quick. So it's when you're bent over and you pull like this, and then a lot of times people just drop it. So they'll pull and drop. So instead, if you're focusing on both, you would control the positive and control and resist the negative. So it's going to look something more like this. Do you guys see the difference in that? Do y'all have any questions? And y'all can go ahead and unmute yourselves if you're on Zoom. Terry, thumbs up, so that makes sense. What about you, Adolfo?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. Have you found in your training any like examples of where you might not have controlled the negative?
Sometimes when I curl, I try to push just the weight up just to get you know, I guess more muscle fibers cut or like
You mean like
damaged. So I just go really, really heavy on the weights sometimes, not all the time.
okay.
So when I do that, it's not like fully controlled, but
Okay.
I
Yeah,
found that
so
it does give like a lot of size.
so you're saying more so like you'll just try to like heave up the weight to try to get more reps in?
No, like I just go really, really heavy. Like let's say I can do like a controlled curl with like a 35 pound.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll go to like a 55 or 60 or something. Just and like, you know, I can't control it, but I push to get like both the strength up, and I've seen that I get like a really nice pump. So
Okay. So like whenever you're doing the 60-pound, is it dumbbells or barbells for
it's a
curls?
dumbbell.
Dumbbells.
It's
Okay.
a curl. It's just a dumbbell curl.
Okay. So whenever you're doing that, are you like kind of like rocking back and forth with your body to try to get it up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a controlled motion. I'm just moving it just to move it.
Okay. And then the negative, are you just dropping it or resisting it?
Yeah, for the most part, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so in that example, so you can actually stimulate both strength and muscle gains at the same time, regardless of the weight, depending of like how you do it. So I will say, so whenever you are, I'm going to say cheating with momentum, you aren't stimulating the muscle fibers as maximally as you could. So yes, you can go heavier than the 30-pound dumbbells that you were doing, but if you go heavier, I would still emphasize to still control both the positive. So that's not heaving. That's not like, using momentum to like kind of like hoist it up. So still control the positive. And then of course also control the negative. And as long as you train to or very close to failure, you're still going to maximally stimulate muscle and strength gains. So anytime that you use momentum in an exercise, like for example, let's say, so an example where it's okay to do that would be like Olympic lifting. So I don't know the names of like all the Olympic lifts, but I think it's called the snatch, where like you deadlift it off the ground and then you like throw it up over your head. So that's a good example of where
It's the snatch and clean.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So that's a good example of where it's permissible from a performance standpoint. And but when you're using momentum like that, you're mostly using skill. Yes, there is strength component of it, but you're improving upon the skill of it when you're using momentum. When you're using momentum, you're not maximally fatiguing muscle fibers. You're basically using inertia to help you get up the weight. And when you're using inertia, you're not fully flexing or fatiguing the muscle. So if you control the concentric and the negative, you'll make your training more effective from a strength and hypertrophy standpoint, and efficient, because you will fatigue faster because you're not, cheating with the momentum. Does that make sense, Adolfo?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. I know Claiborne and Jacob, y'all kind of missed the main training, so y'all probably don't have any questions. I can just tag y'all in the replay afterwards. So does anybody else have any questions on that? I'm just gonna recheck my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, okay. So here's a topic to cover. So should you do negative only training? Because those studies did say that there was better strength and muscle size gain when you did the negatives versus only the concentrics. But I would say no, don't do that. One, because there were better muscle and size, strength and muscle gains in the concentric and eccentric group. And two, doing negative training is more dangerous. You do have to have a partner as well to be able to do negative only training, unless you're going to like hoist the weight up with momentum. But still, it is more dangerous because you are stronger in the negative. You inevitably have to use more weight to, bring as much mechanical tension to the muscle fibers if you're doing negative training only. So let's say you're doing negative training only on bench press. Well, on bench press, like if you're only doing the negative, you have to have a partner lift the weight off of you, and then you have to control the negative from there. Or let's say you're doing squats. Like, how are you going to do negative only training with squats? Like, you're going to have a really strong spotter help you lift it up, and then you're going to have to resist the negative. So, and those are more complicated lifts. Like, yeah, you could get away with maybe like leg press or like machine exercises if you had a partner helping you get the weight up. But overall, I'd say it's not as efficient time-wise, and it's just not necessary. If you're training to failure or very close to failure, and you're controlling both the concentric and the eccentric, you're going to maximally stimulate those muscle fibers. And those of you who are my clients, this is another reason why I I tell you guys, whenever you do reach failure, like let's say you're doing bicep curls and like you fail right here and you literally cannot pull it up anymore, even though you're pulling as hard as you can. Don't drop the negative, even though it's your final rep. Like if you reach failure here and you can't pull it up anymore, and after you do your isometric, where you hold it for a couple of seconds, go ahead and lower it down in a slow and controlled way so that you're still working the negative. And again, remember, the negative is always, you're always going to be stronger in the negative than in the concentric. So that means your muscle still has some work potential that it can get in to fully maximize training to failure, which, as you guys know, is the sweet spot for maximizing strength and muscle gains. Does that make sense to you guys? Those of you who are my clients? Jacob says yes. What about you, Claiborne and Terry? You guys can go ahead and unmute yourselves, by the way. Terry gives a thumbs up. Cool. Okay, let's see. Sorry, guys, I'm just looking at my notes real quick. I wanted to make sure I got everything. Cool, cool. Yeah, so what did you guys think of the study? Okay, I'm gonna call some people out. Let's see. Terry, what did you think? Says interesting.
Shit. Close.
You there, Terry?
Yep. I was trying to type, but
That's okay.
yeah, I mean I was trying to picture how in the hell somebody would do and how they did this study with somebody doing the negative. And it's like, yeah, you have to have somebody doing it with you. And
Yeah.
but yeah, really just, it's not necessarily, and I used to tell the kids at the wrestling school this, it's not how much weight you can lift, it's how much weight you can control.
Yeah, that's so true.
Keep proper form.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was saying earlier, whenever you use momentum, which a lot of people do, they don't realize that they're basically using the benefits of inertia to get a weight moving, to get a weight up. And when you're doing that, you're not fully working the muscle fibers. So yeah, it's not as effective or efficient time-wise. Claiborne says, it sounds interesting. My old workout group would add 3 or so negative only reps after a set. Yeah. I mean, if you have a workout partner, I'd say you could do that after a normal perform set. So when I say normal perform set, I mean focusing on the concentric and eccentric. But I would say it's not necessary. That would be described as set extenders. So extending your set. So if you've already reached failure and then you add on forced negatives, you're basically unnecessarily extending your set. There are lots of studies that just show training to failure and how it's that's all you need, just train to failure. And if you actually did train to failure, you're going to maximally stimulate muscle and strength gains. But when you add on set extenders, you end up adding extra systemic fatigue. Like have you guys like ever like just murdered a muscle group? Like you did like tons and tons and tons of volume and you worked yourself out super hard, and then you're like sore for a week. Like even if you're not a newbie lifter, like I could go into the gym tomorrow and I could like take every set on my legs to absolute failure and do like probably 20 different sets. Would I be training to failure? Yes, but I would be adding on all this additional systemic fatigue that my body has to recover from, not just physiologically, meaning repairing the muscle fibers, but also my central nervous system, because you'll just fry your central nervous system. So it's not required, and it can actually do damage in the long term in terms of delaying recovery time, which is going to interfere with when you can next work out. But yeah, so I thought this study was super cool and interesting. Terry says, and you'll have Bambi legs. Yes. So after looking at these studies, I was trying to think of how, you know, I might be guilty of this in terms of not controlling my negatives, which I know before I was a coach, I was definitely guilty of that. But yeah, even more recently, I was thinking is like, you know, sometimes whenever I do chin-ups, weighted chin-ups, like I'll obviously control the positive, the pulling myself up part, but I find that I let myself drop into the negative. Or even in overhead press, like I typically I'll push it up and then I'll just let it drop. And the reason why I justified it to myself in the past was like, you know, for weighted chin-ups and overhead press, I'm mostly concerned about strength. Like I am performing those as strength lifts. And those of you in my program, you guys know that we also do bodybuilding sets. But yeah, now that I've seen this study, I'm like, I'm gonna fully maximize, you know, the positive, the concentric and the eccentric from now on to, you know, get the greatest potential out of strength and muscle size. Yeah, Terry says like the CrossFitters doing chin-ups. That is a great example of using momentum to get the workout. So yeah, I mean, what they do is impressive, but if they had to do strict pull-ups or chin-ups, they wouldn't be able to do nearly as many because they're not getting the assistance from momentum. Plus also, on the topic of, I say cheating with momentum, it depends on the sport. If it's a competition-based sport, then it's fine, like CrossFit or Olympic lifting. But in terms of just purely exercising, it is technically cheating, and you're cheating yourself out of gains. But on the topic of momentum, it's also not as safe. You're gonna put a lot more stress on your joints, ligaments, and tendons. And yeah, it's not necessary to maximize strength and size gains. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had. You guys have any questions on that? Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining. That wraps up this week. If you guys have any questions, or if you want me to cover a different topic for next week, just let me know in the group. So thanks guys for joining, and I will see y'all soon. Bye.